intentions don't necessarily have everything to do with the art that's created. You can start with bad intentions, or you can start with bad faith, but you can end up creating something inadvertently surprising, masterful, beautiful, whatever kind of adjective you want. Intentions go awry. I mean, that's the.
I mean, one thing you could see is this. I just want to. Oh yeah, okay. In Sibylline, the next poem on the Urnmally page, just to look at this. Well, I'll read the first two stanzas, but it's the second stanza especially. That rabbit's foot I carried in my left pocket has worn a hemorrhage in the lining. The bunch of keys I carry with it jingles like fate in my omphagic ear. And when I stepped clear of the solid basalt, the introverted obelisk of night, I seized upon this Traum Dao Tung as a sword to hew a passage to my love. Okay. And now out of life, permanent revenant, I assert, the caterpillar feet of these predictions lead nowhere. It is necessary to understand that a poet may not exist, that his writings are the incomplete circle and straight drop of a question mark. And yet I know I shall be raised up on the vertical banners of praise. So, on the one hand, this is, the title mocks the notion of poet as prophet, but the second stanza is both truthful and prophetic. Urnmally doesn't exist, and the work of Urnmally is, it is more widely printed, and Nick, tell me if I'm wrong, and us local witness here. Isn't it more widely printed in many Australian anthologies than Macaulay and Stewart? That's what I've read. That's the case? No, Malley. I mean, it's the most interesting stuff written in the 40s, just about. It's really quite amazing. So this is actually, in spite of itself, true and prophetic. This second stanza here. This one of the latest hoaxes. This is the Yasusada Hoax, and here it's not so much the poetry. I mean, there's different issues that are brought up by the Yasusada Hoax. This is, again, it's like the Urnmally hoax, and a little bit like the Spectra hoax. That there's a story. With the Spectra hoax, there's the red-headed Jewess, among other things. There's that figure. In Urnmally, there's Ethel Malley and that narrative envelope around it. In the Yasusada hoax, first, there turn out to be three scholars from Japan who deliver over to America the work of Ariki Yasusada, who they say, the narrative is, he was a Japanese experimental poet who lived through the bombing of Hiroshima. He lost his children and wife in the bombing. He himself died of cancer from radiation years later. So he is, on the one hand, a victim of the A-bomb. On the other hand, he has a taste for experimental writing. It is said that he read Roland Barthes and Jack Spicer, which, a little bit of elementary literary sleuthing finds that that's totally impossible. He couldn't have. But for a while, just for long enough, the hoax, that story held up. And so what you have with Yasusada is a figure who unites contradictory parts of the literary field in the 1990s in America. On the one hand, you have the poetry of authenticity, the poetry of witness, as, to quote Carolyn Forcher's anthology, poets who have witnessed extremity and written about it, people like Paul Celan and others. I mean, who history writes on their bodies and just permeates their poetry, traumatic histories. So you have poetry of witness on the one hand, and then you have language writing, innovation, experimental poetry, which in its sort of caricatured version eschews history and eschews representation and eschews reality and is simply devoted to linguistic play. I mean, I don't agree with that, but that's, I'm caricaturing these two things. And Yasusada unites the two. So he is a sort of a language poet who, lived through Hiroshima. Is why he was, for about, I guess, 9 months, so successful. And there was, when his work came out in various magazines, accompanied by this story, it was very, people paid a lot of attention to it, and it was, found it fascinating. And there was the same kind of sigh of relief in a way that you got with Ossian, of like, this is nice to see that you can unite these two, antithetical tendencies. Then it turns out, there was even a panel about it in this very room, that I think, and most people think, that Kent Johnson, a poet and he's a professor who teaches Spanish in the Midwest, concocted Yasusada. Johnson, if I'm not mistaken, still to this day doesn't admit it. He says that Moto Kiyu invented Yasusada, but Moto Kiyu died, so he still won't admit that he wrote it. And I don't want to deal with his lawyer, and so I won't say anything about this. I don't even know, but no, I'm sort of kidding. But so he sort of insists on maintaining some other figure here. But Ton Lin, the Asian American poet, sat here, and he said to Kent Johnson, let me see if I get it exactly right. I think he said, "This is yellow-faced. This is," or another critic said, "This is Japanesed crap. This is Orientalism, etc. That this is a caricatured, sort of a pious caricature of the sort of wise Oriental." Kent Johnson answered Ton Lin and said, "No," and he answered for Moto Kiyu, not for Kent Johnson. But nevertheless, Kent Johnson said, "No, imaginative sympathy," he said. That, and I think that is the question something like this brings up. Can a poet imaginatively place him or herself in Hiroshima and write with the whatever historical authenticity that experience gives? Does there need to be that historical authenticity? Can you only write about Hiroshima if you suffered Hiroshima in the immediate physical proximity? I mean, those are very deep, permanent questions that this kind of stuff brings up. The actual poems, I don't know. They're interesting, but they're not as interesting to me as the problematic that they point at.